We Saved You a Seat is sponsored by the Oklahoma Family Network. Oklahoma Family Network focuses on supporting families of children and youth with special health care needs and disabilities, as well as families who have children with a mental health or behavioral health diagnosis. Oklahoma Family Network provides families with emotional support, resource navigation, parent-to-parent engagement opportunities, and wants to ensure quality health care for all children and families by building strong and effective family professional partnerships. Part 5 of Salena's story via our podcast is still focused on her postpartum journey of advocacy, CT scans, readmission, and survival. Thank you for listening to one story that represents many more. It's not easy to walk back through the trauma of what happened, and we are incredibly grateful that Salena could share her story with us and that you could listen. This is episode 5 of 6, breaking down my conversation with Salena. Thank you for joining us and helping provide a little context to maternal morbidity and mortality. I mean, there's truly no words when that amount of trust has been broken. Taking your story as someone who is educated, who is light-skinned, who knows how to advocate for themselves, who has trusted family that is there to support them and to help get them where they need to be and carry them, and you still weren't listened to. I just sit there and reflect on how many other people out there didn't have those same parameters and have suffered consequences that cannot be changed. And so I just want you to know from my perspective how much I appreciate you sharing these pieces of this, because I know this is not the end of your story. I mean, this is truly, you know that things are not going well. And now what do you do and how do you get people to listen to you to the point where it's like, I don't feel right. What do I do now to make sure that people know? Was it the numbers that turned people, like, that opened their eyes? Was it the blood work? Was it you just finally calling and screaming at somebody? I mean, I just cannot imagine. You've given them all the indicators. So you're with us still, so I'm thankful that we have you here. That is for sure. You are still with us. So you have to tell us what happened, what got their attention through getting you through the next steps.
Yeah, thank you so much for the words of affirmation. I absolutely am so grateful for all of the protective factors that I had surrounding myself. Because without them, I know I would be dead. I would not be here to share this story. And it really hurts me to think of all the women who don't have the background to be able to even talk about it afterwards, right? You know, it's hard, and I have every protective factor possible. So I just appreciate your acknowledgement of that, because that is a huge piece that I don't want to ever get lost, is that I am a highly privileged person and this still happened to me. And it's very hard even for me to speak out about it. So I can't fathom or imagine the amount of people who this is happening to and who don't have a space to share it, who don't have, I've talked about my family and my friends, but I also have an incredibly supportive work family, people who have allowed me to make connections with you, people who have allowed me to experience and explore how can I do this as a part of my job. And I've been able to move forward knowing that maybe I can make a difference. And it physically pains me, and I have nightmares about women who don't have those supports in place, or who are no longer with us because they were failed and who can't share their story. And so it doesn't matter how hard it is for me. I will always share if it can even move the needle a tiny bit, because of that, because of those women, because of their families and the losses that are happening as we're having this conversation.
I am so thankful for the people who are able to share the hard so that it will move the needle, as you said, to benefit others in our maternal health outcomes here in the state. Whew. So with that said, what was it that got their attention?
Yeah. I still had to call, my blood work, all of that came back, and I called at 8 a.m. and I guess my physician had went on vacation again. So I got connected with my nurse, and I told her you need to look at my chart and see all my labs. And she said, "Oh yeah, something's clearly going on. We close at noon today, so can you get here right now?" And I said, "Sure. What else do I have going on other than dying?" Um, yeah. And and so I said, "Okay." I come in and I saw a different physician, and he took my C-section, like the butterfly strips off, and looked at it, and he said, "This looks good. You don't have an infection here. Um, I don't know why your labs would be this way." And I said, "Well, the ER told me I really needed to have a CT scan and that I needed to advocate for that and that I need to do that." And he said, "I don't know. I don't know if you need that. You could just be, I don't know, like it could just be some." He didn't even really give me anything. It was just, I don't know. And I said, "Okay, well, I would really like you to get me a CT scan because that's what the ER said that I needed. And I'm in a lot of pain. Like I couldn't even walk in here alone. So something needs to happen." And he said, "Okay." And the nurse scheduled me a CT scan for 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I went in, it was 9 o'clock. So I had to wait around. And when I was leaving, she said, "Hey, I've mentioned that we close today at noon, so no one's going to be here to get your results. So when your results come in, they're going to go to our on-call physician, and he is notorious for not looking at labs, not looking at results, not checking stuff. And so when you get your results, you need to call our on-call line, and you need to tell him, because it doesn't go straight to the on-call physician, it goes to like a service. It's like you need to tell him to look at your results if he hasn't called you by 4 p.m. And I said, "Okay, sure. Why not? Of course I do. Of course that is something else I'll have to do, right?" So I go to get my CT scan. I got there and I can't get on the bed. I can't get on the CT scan bed. So the techs had to come and help me on the bed. And as they're prepping me for this, they're saying, "It's going to be a couple hours before you get any results because we're really backed up. We've had lots of appointments today, and it's just going to be a little while." So, because I had mentioned that my doctor, they told me I needed to call once I got the results. And on your my chart, as soon as they're read and put in there, you can see them. And so they were like, "Yeah, it'll be a couple hours." And I said, "Okay, sounds good." Um, I mean, whatever. At this point, again, I'm just in so much pain. It's just what it is. And so then my CT scan is done, and they're looking at me, and I'm like, "Hey, I can't get out of this bed, guys. Like, I need help to get up, right?" And so the techs come in, but then the person who had actually done my CT scan came out from behind the thing, and yeah, and came to help pick me up. And they were like, "Don't help yourself. Don't try and do anything right now. Like, don't, whatever." They got the sheet, they moved me up myself. They were like, "You don't put any weight on anything." So then I'm like, red alarms going off. Like, why are you telling me not to do stuff? Like, what did you just see in my body? Because you obviously saw something. So then they go, "You're going to have your results within a couple minutes. You need to call your doctor. If you don't hear from your doctor, you need to call your doctor." And I was like, "I thought you just said it was going to be a couple hours." And they're like, "You're going to get your results in a couple minutes. You need to call your doctor." And I was like, "Okay." And so then I'm leaving. And as I'm going out of this building to go get in the car, I got a my chart thing so like within 7 minutes, I had my results. And the first CT scan showed a lot of gas in my uterus that in the, readings said it was consistent with endometritis from a gas-forming organism. And then they also saw a 5 centimeter left paracolitic gutter mass, which was either going to be a hematoma or an abscess. And so that is what that left quadrant pain had been, which was my top complaint as of 24 hours post C-section. So that was kind of validating. I mean, at that point, I was like, oh, yeah, okay. Well, cool. I mean,
I'm not crazy. I'm not
yeah,
crazy. Because you start to
e-
question everything about yourself when no
yeah,
one is listening, and you're not crazy.
exactly. And I got in the car and I said, honey, I said that, honey, I'm not crazy. Like there's something, because he was like, my husband is a very optimistic, cool side of the pillow kind of guy, like very wants everything to be okay. And I'm like, Tyler, there's really something wrong with me. And he's like, no, I don't, what do you mean? Like, I wish you were just crazy. And I'm like, no, there's not, something's wrong with me. So I'm like, let's just go back to the hospital because let's go see Sophia. Because at this point, I've been away from her all day and I want to go see my baby in the NICU. And I thought, well, if it's bad enough, when I look at the CT scan, it shows a, critical thing for me too. But I just was in so much pain. I just was like, well, whatever. They're not going to believe me. I mean, the mindset that I was in was that I genuinely was going to die and it just was going to be a matter of time. So I might as well go hang out with my baby because I thought this person is not going. The physician who was on call, who they said was notorious for these things, was the same physician who had sent me home from the hospital telling me that I was in emotional pain, that I only wanted to be there because my baby was, and who had laughed and said, that'll do it. That's the same doctor who was my on call physician for having to go back with sepsis. So I just really didn't have a lot of faith that it was going to be all right. And so hours go by, and I called their on call line like the nurse had told me to do. And they said, oh, well, like we're not going to tell him to read the stuff. Like if it's urgent, like it's, he'll do it later. And I said, no, you don't understand. The radiology person told me to tell you that it's urgent. The nurse told me to tell you to tell him to do it. So they said, okay. And then another hour goes by. We had left the hospital because I thought, well, he's just never going to call me. We had left. We got back to my house, 20 minutes away, and I get a phone call as we're pulling into our garage, and it's the physician, and he says, hey, how are you feeling? And I said, pretty awful, pretty awful. And he laughed and he said, yeah, you've got an infection. He didn't mention my abscess at all. He just said I had a uterine infection. And then he said, I don't even know how to direct admit you to the hospital, but you need to go back to the hospital like right now because you've got a pretty bad infection. Um, I mean, I was from the CT scan, I was septic, I had a fever, and I was in continually escalating pain, and he was still struggling to take me seriously. Like he was still laughing, still making jokes. Um, and that would be, the catalyst to how that whole hospital stay ended up going. Um, I didn't get another CT scan until the 20th, so it was 3 days later, 2 days later, 3 days later. Um, because he had told me that the IV antibiotics that he gave me would make the abscess go away, even though an abscess that's over 3 centimeters per ACOG guidelines is not going to be responsive to antibiotics. It is always going to have to be drained by intervention radiology. And when I brought that up to him, because again, I know how to read literature, right? He told me that I was wrong and that it would go away, and he was sure of it. He even made notes in my chart that likely will discharge patient tomorrow because IV antibiotics will make her abscess go away. It's in my he wrote that in there. Like anyway. So flash forward, it didn't obviously go away. I'm on IV antibiotics. It did make my uterine infection that had spread all over the rest of my system. It did go away, but my abscess, because I had waited another 2 days, uh, by the time I got a CT scan, it had become I can't ever say this word right. Multiloculated, which basically means it's way more complicated to deal with. It has lots of different, it's in different areas of the skin and inside. It was deep in my abdomen, so it's along my colon. And they had also wrote in there that they were really concerned that it had developed a fistula to my colon, which if that were to happen and they began talking, it would have immediately been septic shock and I would have died. It also had grown another half an inch, so it was 5.5 centimeters instead of being just 5 centimeters. And my pain had continued to worsen, right? So I had every day that I was in the hospital, my pain had continually gotten worse and worse and worse, even with my uterine infection going away. Um, and by the time I got another CT scan, it was like I mentioned Sunday, he had already went off call, so it was a new physician that I now had to deal with from their practice. And they all said the same thing, which was intervention radiology isn't going to bother with you. You're not severe enough. They're not going to do anything, so we're not even going to call them. They didn't even call them until Monday morning. I had been there since Friday. And when they finally called uh, intervention radiology was flabbergasted that they had not reached out to them over the weekend because how big the abscess was and the area that it was in my body is such a dangerous place to have an abscess and a highly, highly sensitive, so highly, highly painful area to have an abscess is in the literature everywhere listed as a serious postoperative infection that can cause maternal severe morbidity and mortality. So it's, I mean, very clearly documented all over ACOG, all over the literature that where my um, abscess was and the level of sick that I was in severe danger. I was listed as a maternal near miss. And so by the time they did the drain, I had had my blood drawn, I had had IVs blown. I mean, I had a panic attack when they went to go do the intervention radiology. So you're in the CT scan and you're awake and they're placing the drain through a guided, all of these things. And they had to give me medicine because I was having a panic attack, like being poked again and prodded. And, I felt my whole C-section. So it really reminded me of that experience that had just occurred. And um, it was so traumatic. I mean, and he made dismissive comments through that whole time. That whole weekend I had been trying to pump and I'll never forget one day he came in and he said I wasn't pumping and he said, "Oh, it must be a good day because your boobies aren't out today." And I was just like, "What?" And he kept making comments about like we can't send you home now because then, what if you get sicker and have to come back? And I was like, "Yeah, that already happened." And he was like, "Well, who sent you home?" And I was like, "You did. You did." And so their whole practice, every physician who came to see me after that was like, "We're not sending you home. You're never going home. Like until this is gone, you might have to stay here for until your drain comes out." And during this time, um, my baby was discharged from the NICU the same day that I went to go get my CT scan that showed that my abscess had gotten so much worse. So by Sunday, she was discharged, and they didn't communicate with me that she was being discharged. The NICU had called the nurse on the floor that I was on, and the nurse had said, "Yeah, send her on down here." So when my Nana, my grandma, went to go see Sophia because I was going into my CT scan, uh, they were packing up all her stuff, and no one was even down there with me. There was no adult, and the nurse said, "Oh, well, I just thought anyone could hold her while you went and got your CT scan. I didn't think it was relevant to tell you that they were discharging her down here." And mind you, I'm in an antepartum wing, so they told me I would have no mother baby nurse support. They couldn't help me with her at all because she wasn't a patient anymore. Um, yeah, it was a train wreck. So they did end up discharging her to my room while I was critically ill. Thankfully, I had family and friends who could support me, but again, as we mentioned, that is not the case for most people who could just take off work and be there for you and help not only care for me who was not getting good care in the hospital, but my newborn who had just gotten released from the NICU after almost dying into a room where it was the size of a hallway. I had to request them to bring me a bassinet for her that they said they didn't know if they were going to be able to because it wasn't a mother baby floor. So they brought it to me. I had to, use the microwave that they use coffee in, that they did food in. They kept my milk in their personal refrigerator. And so I didn't even have anywhere to store my own milk in my room. Uh it was just such a crazy experience. Um and during all of this, I ended up missing her first pediatric appointment because I didn't get discharged until Wednesday. And I had a drain. So I had my drain in, I still was very limited on what I couldn't do. And I was on so many antibiotics, it really altered breastfeeding wasn't happening. She wouldn't latch. Um, and I was just in pain. I couldn't really hold her. It was really, really difficult. Um, and everything was just so disorganized. And it really felt like I was trying to hold this whole system together with my own numb hands. Like someone who should have been being taken care of by a system, I felt like I was playing pick me up with all of the different areas, like telling intervention radiology why they didn't get me to them sooner. I was trying to advocate for myself with the doctors who, I had to have my sister-in-law, who I mentioned was a surgeon, call them to give me the right antibiotic because they had started me on an antibiotic that wouldn't have helped my actual infection. And she had to call and speak to the doctor. And then the doctor went and changed my antibiotic based on what my sister said. So if my sister-in-law hadn't been a surgeon, my actual other infection wouldn't have went away either. And that's just another layer of that privilege coming through to be like, I almost died, but I didn't because of my privilege and chance, right? These things are systemic failures that I know are happening to other women.
As I wrap up this episode, please let me share that you do not want to miss the final episode. We discuss Salena's thoughts on what she'd like to see happen for others to reduce maternal mortality, and she also shares with us other advocacy and support ideas that she has. Thank you again for joining us on this episode of We Saved You a Seat. Thank you for listening to this episode of We Saved You a Seat. Oklahoma Family Network promotes family-centered care and provides tools so families can make informed decisions, advocate for improved services, build connections among families, and serve as a trusted resource in health care of children and young adults. If you would like to become a supporting family or get in touch with another family, please contact Oklahoma Family Network at oklahomafamilynetwork.org or by calling 405-271-5072.